Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to see my senior big board. I'm William Sargent of the Flex program at Seaholm High School, and for about the past year, I've been researching the problems of American education. Today, I'm here to speak specifically about the problem of the lack of intrinsic motivation in schools, which I refer to as the lack of the inner force. To draw you a little bit into my research and make it relevant to your lives, I need to ask you the personal question, what do you hate about school? Or if you're an adult, what did you hate about school when you were there? I tend to hear responses of homework. There was too much homework, possibly, or the homework was too repetitive, or it didn't seem to have enough to do with your actual interests as a child. I see this theme of schoolwork not being relevant to your interests over and over again when I research what students are most dissatisfied with in schools today. And I want you to consider how this quote applies to your life from Maria Montessori. The jockey offers a piece of sugar to his horse before jumping into the saddle. The coachman beats his horse so that he may respond more quickly to the signs given by the reins, but neither of these runs so superbly as the free horse of the plains. I want you to think, when you were doing your homework, or any sort of schoolwork, while you were at school, did you do it because of the nature of the work itself, because you found pleasure in it? Or did you do it because of the rewards offered for doing the homework, good grades and the approval of authority figures, and the punishments offered for not doing the work, bad grades, and disapproval from authority figures? Were you a horse being driven by a jockey or a coachman, or were you a free horse of the plains, not being goaded by sugar or a whip, by a carrot or a stick? Which one were you, and is it appropriate that people should put the yoke upon each other in schools, like a rider would put a yoke upon a horse? Relating to this problem of the lack of self-interest, the lack of the force that makes the free horse run beautifully and gracefully over the plains, John Taylor Gatto, a teacher in the New York City area, in his acceptance speech for the 1990 NYC Teacher of the Year Award, noted many problems that he had observed among public school children under his tutelage that he saw as being related to a lack of personal identity among students. He saw an indifference to the adult world. This, as he noted in his speech, seems to go against the experience that millions of years should have given humanity. Throughout all of humanity's history, we would have expected children to be the people most interested, fascinated with joining the adult world because of the independence involved and the chance to do productive work in a more broad setting than children are normally allowed or have access to. Instead, he found that these children satisfy themselves with really simple, childish things, like playing video games and watching TV. Remember those hours of SpongeBob, anyone? He saw that these children tended to have no curiosity about learning, and what they did have tended to be transitory, fleeting, produced in a child only by a reward offered for doing a certain piece of research, or a punishment offered for not doing the research. He observed that children in public schools today have a poor sense of how tomorrow is related to today, and also of how today is related to the past. They have a poor sense of continuity across the course of their lives. He noted in his speech the psychological effects on children of having to move from class to class at the sound of a bell, the timing of which is completely arbitrary with relation to what the child is working on. For example, a child could be enjoying the process of solving a complex math problem, and all of a sudden their work would be interrupted by needing to move on to a different subject area. Perhaps a different math problem, perhaps a different and completely unrelated class. This is the other problem that he observed with the schedule of children's school days. They move from class to class, but there is no connection among the subjects of the classes. You could go from a PE class to a music class to a language arts class to a whole range of other classes, none of which are grouped together under any broad structure of learning. No class is grouped together with other classes in a way that tries to make students see the unity of all of human knowledge and the connection of it all, the grandeur of it all. Both these aspects of children's school day schedules contribute to a poor sense of logical thinking about time and how a poor sense of continuity between the past and the future. Because if you see life as a series of disconnected subject areas, which you aren't allowed to really deeply delve into, because of course at any moment you could be interrupted by the bell and having to go on to do something completely different, you will then tend to see the entire world that way, as a series of small, disconnected thoughts and activities which are just scattered randomly across time, and which aren't part of a larger or a personal plan of productivity and learning. He found that children that he observed in schools have a very shallow, or an ersatz sense of personal identity, and that because of this they tend to be insecure with very close personal relationships with other children, and also probably even more likely with adults. Because when these children get into a close situation with another person, discussing very personal issues, or very deep thoughts or aspects of personality, the disguise starts to wear thin, and it turns out that what the identities of many children consist of are what they've learned they have to adopt to please authority figures and to get good grades. A lot of children, Gatto found, don't have their personalities because it's really them, or because it's internally consistent. They don't have a sense of personal identity which would lead to a sense of intrinsic motivation, because all they know is the motivations and personalities related to the motivations that are modeled for them by other people, and that they are encouraged to have because of the system of prizes and punishments, pieces of sugar and whips. And finally, there's a problem with children today that's very much related to the problem of the lack of curiosity, and that is that most children are very passive or even timid when facing possible new challenges, even in subject matter that they might enjoy. Of course, if you lack a sense of curiosity and a sense that you can delve into a project or a subject matter without it being part of a school structure, then you're not going to have a sense of your own personal projects following your own intrinsic motivation. And you're going to be passive when it comes to adopting new projects, because you face a choice between something you've never experienced, which is projects done just because you want to do them, and on the other hand, projects which you're required to do for a grade, but which you aren't really interested in. So what is this child doing right here? This is me at about... How old am I in the book picture?
2.5.
Here I am at 2.5 years old, reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which is a classic of children's literature, which kept me on the edge of my seat for hours when I was just beginning my entry into the great world of learning. Now, what you see here is the natural condition of a child before the system of prizes and punishments that schools operate on interferes. I was not promised a reward for reading. I wasn't promised a punishment for not reading. I simply picked up the book on my own and read through it with the deepest concentration and fully enjoying the experience. And it was a purely spontaneous desire. And that is, in fact, what all children are like. Spontaneous and starting their own projects, just based on their own inner forces. Unfortunately, this kind of state doesn't usually last long. The educational system interferes with it. We're going to look at some ways in which the sense of intrinsic motivation is gradually destroyed by the school system. There are two main components to how intrinsic motivation is encouraged not to develop in a child's mind. They're very closely related. First, there is the sense of internalized grades among school children these days. Second, there's the sense of that children are not taught that they need to have a sense of personal identity in schools. Just as John Taylor Gatto observed, children have a fake sense of personal identity, a shallow or haphazard one, because they've never learned that they need to have an internally consistent self with its own purpose and its own inner force. First, we're going to look more closely at the problem of internalized grades. There are two main ways I know that grades become internalized in children's minds today. First, we have too much homework. And second, and second of all, we are taught via the honor culture which exists in schools that grades, achieving certain grades, are the ultimate purpose of our education. In the book, The Case Against Homework, Sarah Bennett and Nancy Kalish look at the fact that over the past several decades, the amount of free time which children have had to develop their own sense of personal identity and simply to relax after the stress of the high school day has decreased significantly. I know from personal experience that high school kids are not pleasant to be around when the subject of homework is brought up. You will get groans, glares, and outright "ugh" expressions. That is, in essence, what the school day feels like because of the large amount of homework we must do when we get home, which teaches us that the purpose of our school experience is not to invent and follow our own personal projects, which are meaningful to us and which are productive, but to do other people's projects. And second, for the problem of internalized grades, there's also the fact that there's a strong culture of honor in grades built into schools. The author of Feel Bad Education, Alfie Kohn, looked at several studies done across the United States of middle schools, which compared levels of cheating in each school. The authors of the study found that cheating drastically increased in schools the more systems of valedictorians, stress upon grades, honor rolls, and things like that the school had. Because the more the schools had of those, the more children were taught that the purpose of their life in school was to get an A, regardless of the methods used. And as a result, many children have not actually learned anything from the work they've done, or pretended to do, because they've just pretended to do it. They haven't even given themselves the chance to enjoy it. They've just learned that the purpose of education is to get the grade and get out, not have an intrinsically motivated experience where you learn who you actually are and what that means you should do. And now, it's time to move on to the second way in which intrinsic motivation is destroyed over time in children. There is the problem of Now for the second problem that causes intrinsic motivation to gradually wither in children from this Edenic state at the beginning to the disinterested and shallow people that I often observe in schools, in classrooms today. The second problem is that in schools, children are not taught the importance of having a sense of individual self, of having a self that is true to them, that they're familiar with, and that they've assembled themselves, and not haphazardly, not just out of bits and pieces of the culture around them, but out of things that really feel good to them. In her book, The Montessori Method, which I've already quoted, Maria Montessori looked at the fact that the situation of many children is like the situation of certain government clerks. They confer a great good on their country by transferring amounts of information from one stack of paper to the next. In the same way, in a way, children do confer a great good on the country in the long run by learning something in schools, even if all it is just transferring information one-to-one from one piece of paper to another, from the source to the test bubble. But she observed that these government clerks of her time were not interested in the actual work itself. They were only interested in getting a promotion or a pay raise, or at least keeping their job. In the same way, they have no sense, the clerks have no sense of personal importance in their work. Children have no sense of personal importance in in the work that they do. To them, what it means is transferring the information from one sheet to another in order to at least graduate from the grade. And in that way, she said that an army of giants facing an army of pygmies which believed in their autonomy as a group would be helpless against the pygmies, because the pygmies would have a sense of intrinsic motivation in what they were doing. The giants would be basically soulless because they wouldn't believe in their own freedom, but the pygmies would have something to believe in while they fought, and so they would do truly good work on the battlefield. And in the same way, children have to have something to believe in schools, and that thing should be themselves. But unfortunately, children are never taught in schools that they need to actually know themselves and have a self. And now that I've gotten your spirits down a little bit, I think it's time to get them back up again by looking at the fact that these are problems we can change. Education is a human construct, and as such, it can easily be changed, even if it takes a few decades to do so. We have to start at the earliest ages of children and work upwards to engender a sense of intrinsic motivation in children. The article, The Building Blocks of a Good Pre-K, which appeared in the New York Times recently, summarized how